Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight on the Dressage Masterclass evening for young horses. Thanks to Melissa Cannon for asking Ricky and myself to join on this program tonight. Um, so basically, Ricky and myself, we run the Australian Equine Behaviour Centre. Really, our core business is in starting young horses. Majority of them being dressage horses, but we really get a whole range of different breeds and many different disciplines. We also do a lot of retraining and re-breaking in as well as just general training and long-term performance training. So tonight's presentation, it's really on the young horse all the way from yearlings and yearling handling all the way through to six-year-old dressage horses. It's really interesting to look at it, that there's so much training, if you really look into it, that goes into the young horse before they actually become a young dressage horse. So when I look at my own horses and all the work that I would do with my own horses before they're started, I look back to their yearling training and really think that actually this age is really where their sporting career starts, and not really just after they've been broken in or as a 4-year-old when they start going out competing. It's not that the sessions as a yearling are anything to do with work or anything, really physical, but it's just about starting to stimulate their brain in the right way and getting them to, understand the basic ideas of how to learn using pressure release. There's so much that can go wrong with using pressure release, and that really makes, the next stage being, say, the breaking in or the backing and breaking in phase. It makes that much more difficult if they don't get this stage right. So I guess whether you're someone like myself that has young horses of my own, or a breeder, or anyone who really has a yearling, there's certain things that can be done that make the whole horse's life much easier if we get these things done right at this very early stage. It's really about teaching the horse how to learn, and the horse, we don't want the horse to figure that out on its own. It has to be taught how to learn. As an example, they really learn from the release of pressure. The pressure motivates them to do something, and the release of that pressure then trains that response. So this can work, for us if we do it correctly. When we're leading the horse around, we apply a pressure and release when the horse gives to that pressure or responds in the right way. But it can also work very much against us, where the horse learns to push on a pressure, and if we're not careful or if our basics aren't good enough, then they actually learn to push through a pressure to get a release, and that can result in horses pushing through us and running away and getting away from us, or anything, running backwards, any type of evasion that can start at this age. We really need to make sure we have good basic responses to be able to deal with those evasions. It's the horse's flight response is there from right there from the beginning, really. But in terms of our interactions with them, it comes about as yearlings, because that's usually when we start to handle them. So their own flight response in the paddock is really, not an issue. They're allowed to run away from whatever they want. And in the paddock, they usually get used to, whatever's going on around them in their life, because they get fed and all of that whilst everything's going on around them. But when we handle them, it's really important to have tools to be able to deal with their natural flight response. And especially at this age where they're not so big, that's really the key factor here, is that as a yearling, they're quite small and light and much easier to handle and deal with than when they're 2.5 or 3 and they're much bigger, or especially for some of the horses that we've gotten in at even 6 years of age for breaking in and older. At that stage, they're really much too big to be teaching very basic things or even fixing basic issues that they had that have started right back from when they were yearlings. So as a yearling, we really need to teach them how to lead correctly. And we get a lot of people that bring their horse in and we ask them, they come for a specific issue, but we always ask them, does he lead well? Oh, yeah, no, he leads perfectly. There's no issue there, but he does occasionally run away from me or something like that. So then we really think, well, then he doesn't lead. He really only follows you. And there's a big difference between being able to lead a horse versus just having one following you around. A horse that leads very well is certainly much easier to break in than a horse that just follows you around. We really want to teach the horse, even as yearlings, have basic understandings of how to respond to pressure forwards, backwards, sideways on the lead, and be able to lead them through not overly difficult things, but basic obstacle training, stepping over poles and little things that are mildly maybe even a little bit scary for the horse, but we get through it, and that really builds a very good trusting relationship between the horse and the handler. It's certainly, from my experience, much easier, and certainly I think from any breaker's experience, much easier if the horse has had good handling from the beginning versus a horse that's had handling where they've learnt to push through and run away and the person's persisted with that. I think as soon as you're at that stage where the horse tries to do the opposite and your training hasn't succeeded, then you're actually better off to immediately contact the person who is going to break in the horse or one of your local trainers to help you get through that. So the yearling training was really, from a yearling to around 2.5 years old. We certainly prefer to break them in at around 2.5 years of age. This is, again, comes down to the fact that they're a lot smaller and a lot easier to work with. And again, the breaking in or the backing and breaking in phase at this stage is really nothing about work and making them, exercise. It's really about educating them. So there's really no issue with starting a horse at 2.5, providing that the work is not physically too demanding, and that really the goals should just be to get an understanding or get the horse to have an understanding of what it's meant to do. And it really, again, reiterating on what I've just said about the yearlings, it's so much easier for the horse if they've already learnt basic things in hand, how to lead forward, stop, step back. As even, as a yearling, if the person is capable enough, you can even in a small area like a stable or some cross ties, just teach them to bend and hold their nose and be able to bend their neck towards you and push your hand against the inside of their rib cage and just yield their body around you. Little exercises like that make them much more accepting of pressure. And again, this acceptance of the pressure and also being responsive to it really helps the breaker. So in terms of the idle age being at 2.5, it's not only to do with the fact that they're smaller and easier. It's also because for our general work being that some of our horses come from professional riders, but some of them also come from amateur riders who maybe don't or haven't done that initial handling properly, or possibly haven't done it at all, then if they haven't done that, 2.5 really is still an easy age to go through and fix certain issues that might be there without it being too much of a drama. If the horse had really good handling and there was no issue there, then breaking them in at an older age really isn't too much of an issue. In terms of the breaking in phase and the backing phase, it's a lot about getting them used to the tack. So all of this, or a lot of that can be done as well as a yearling at yearling age. But really, in terms of the saddle and the weight of the saddle, the bridle, it's not too difficult. As long as they've had rugs on and things like that as a yearling, that can make a big difference in terms of their confidence at having things on top of them. that really makes that it's not necessary to put the saddle on or anything like that, just in case something goes wrong and they don't have, or the owner doesn't have the facilities to handle that. But it's really about familiarizing them with that tack. The mouthing process is a really interesting one. We get a lot of horses that come in for breaking in or re-breaking in, especially, that haven't been mouthed correctly. And there's a lot of, there's not a lot of understanding or no precise understanding of exactly the process of mouthing. A lot of people seem to have very unique ways of doing it. In terms of our way of mouthing a horse, we really try and teach the horse the basic lunging and bending around us. So what I was talking about just before in the stable, that's a big part of our breaking in process, is teaching them to bend to the inside and push our hand against their belly and just teach them to yield their body around them. That's a really important tool for them to learn and to get through the resistance with just a simple halter, and also the lunging with just a simple halter, so that they really understand basic ideas of how to bend and trot around, and any little scoots and jumps that they might do when they're on the lunge, or when you're in the small environment pushing them around. We want to get through that as much as possible with a halter on, so that when we put the bit in their mouth and we teach them to bend and stop and all of those things that we can do hopefully off our voice a little bit more, it's all a lot smoother, and any little frights that they get hopefully have been mostly dealt with the halter. This makes for a much smoother mouthing experience for the horse, and really encourages them to accept the bit in the correct way. In terms of, back to the bending, it's really a great tool, being able to just push them around in a small area like a stable, because it really, if anyone's, and it's a great exercise to try with your horse, is to just, with the bridle on, is just hold the inside rein and push your hand against their belly and, try and yield their body forward and away from you. It's amazing how many horses feel that pressure and immediately tighten and try and push in against you. And that really goes to tell you, like, what could be much better in your horse's understanding of that. But particularly when we're mouthing a horse, we want the horse to understand very early on that when they've got the neck to the left, for example, and I say neck because when you've got the halter on, it's quite hard to encourage precise flexion. But when you've got the neck to the left, we want the left side of the horse's body to be nice and soft, or actually, in reality, it's the outside of the body, the muscles lengthen and give, allowing them to soften to the inside. So this really is a crucial part of our mouthing process, is that, yes, they've learnt their basic aids in terms of, understanding how to stop, and they're not trying to run through us, so we don't have to use the bit in a strong way at all. But the bending really allows us to teach them right from that early stage to be soft laterally to the bit, not in towards themselves, but just to be soft laterally to the bit, and then they will be much better from that, especially with the work we've done at our hand, accepting leg pressure in combination with having a contact. The process really for us, once we've done the mouthing and the lunging, is about, and you can see this in the photo just to the right, is about backing the horse. And this is something that should be done very slowly and incrementally, only going to the horse's or below the horse's threshold at any point. So we do this really very slowly, laying over them. Initially we do it bareback actually, and just have someone laying over, and then whilst the other one holds. But once you get to the saddle and you do this part, we lay over them, and even have both reins in our left hand, and where you can see my right hand feeding that horse, we actually sometimes just hold the stirrup with that and just bump them around on a circle. And again, it's just one thing that we do that breaks down the whole process for the horse from being lunged, which is quite a long distance from the horse, to then not quite sitting up and riding and fully committing to the process, but just that little in-between part. So we'll ride them around, or lay over them and kind of walk them around like that and get them used to our weight on their back. But then they visually don't have to see us right above them, and they can learn, what we've already taught them on the long reins and the lunge and the in-hand work in the stable. They can learn with us now on top of them. So then once we've done that, the rest of the process is really very smooth. Once we sit up and we've done enough of this laying over, sitting up is not an issue, and we go about our normal training. I can't get into any of that with too much detail. Sorry, my dog is just having a bit of a fit in the background. I can't get into any of the process in too much detail because there's just not enough time for it. But this breaking in process, usually the first part, if ideally done, is around 4 to 6 weeks. And again, majority of that is work off the horse, or equally amount is work off the horse as it is on the horse. So it's quite easy. I always say to people that the process is really about sending the horse to the breaker, sending the horse home, and then back to the breaker for a little refresher, and then the owner should be able to take the reins at that stage. But the process of the horse going in and out of being ridden should really go until the horse is 3.5 to 4 years of age. There shouldn't be in consistent work for any longer than, say, 3 or 4 months at a time from being a breaker. That would be too long, and even 3 or 4 months can be very long for some, depending on their maturity. So it's really important to just see that the goal here is just about basic education and really nothing to do with building their muscles too much or anything like that. It's just about letting the body naturally do what it's going to do while it develops, but just putting in those little bits of education. And we want to do that as early as we can, so that the horse has the most amount of time of just coming in and out and really learning to just be a ridden horse before their real career starts. So that's why I talk about this yearling training and all of the things that have to come into this process long before the horse has turned 4 and might go to its first competition. There's a whole series of things that the horse needs to learn incrementally, so that the horse has enough time to, one, learn them, but get to that stage where they really start to relax in their body. I've certainly seen a lot of horses, and we certainly get them sent in that come in at 3.5 years of age, or even slightly older, and then their goal is still to go to Dressage with the Stars as a 4-year-old, and that's a lot for the horse. I'm not saying it can't be done, because some temperaments really allow for this, but it's certainly not ideal even with the right temperament. And then down the bottom here, I've just still got breaking at an older age. So I've said this before, it's really not an issue for a horse to be breaking in older. We've actually broken in a horse recently that was 12. And I was initially very skeptical about it. In fact, I said, we don't do that. So I said no. But then with coronavirus and all of that, I said, maybe we might end up needing the business after all. So then we took it in, and it was actually absolutely fine. So it really goes to show that with good handling and good handling throughout its life, and it understood, the concept of responding to pressure, but also accepting the pressure, that it really then didn't matter about, breaking it at an older age. But we've had many 6-year-olds too that have been, maybe a little too difficult as 2-year-olds for the owners, but then have been pushed off to the side, and then that kind of, just sitting in the paddock and doing nothing, but has really cemented their idea in their head that they, don't have to do anything if they're told to. So 4-year-olds, we have to think about, the beginning of dressage and what are the dressage basics of a 4-year-old. And again, I can't go into too much detail, but it's really about starting to ride. We've already done transitions as a young, breaker and everything like that, but it's really about starting to ride more the lines that are required in 4-year-old tests and things like that. Diagonals, 20-meter circles, being able to ride transitions on these lines. They don't have to be perfect transitions, but just being able to focus on what the basics really are, being able to maintain the flexion and bend and your line whilst riding the transition down and then up again. And these sometimes sound very easy, but there's almost an infinite amount of how specific you can be on those certain things, and that's really what stops the horse from getting bored in the end of these really basic exercises, is that we can actually make them more and more precise, and the more precise we make them with horses, the more precise the horse allows us to be, again, with building it to be even better. As a 4-year-old, there's really, from this point on, in my opinion, there's no real time frame that's particularly important. It's really up to the rider's skill and ambition, as well as the horse's obviously temperament and trainability and conformation. All of those things, play a role. But I mean, there's no real time frame like there is in terms of getting a horse broken in. I believe that there really is a 2.5 to 3 years old time frame that is certainly easiest for horses to be backed and lightly broken in. But from this point in, if someone wants to take longer and has no goals of doing young horse classes, then that really makes no difference to the horse. The horse can still very much achieve its full potential. So then it's in terms of, and it's a bit the same in terms of their flight response. We have to think that sometimes it's easy, if we've managed the flight response in hand and the horse it doesn't mean that the horse doesn't get scared of anything, because that's unrealistic for a young horse. They're always going to get scared. But basically, when the horse does get a fright, he stays with you. He doesn't shoot past the line of your shoulder and pull your arm out of its socket and drag you down the laneway. Once we're past that stage and we have the horse, reliably under control, and we've exposed the horse in hand to, some challenging situations, some obstacles and things like that, we then have to think about managing it in the ridden side of things as well, which is slightly different in terms of how we control it. So we still have to think that the horse's flight response is a very natural thing. And when the horse gets scared of something, it's very rewarding for the horse to run and get distance and speed away from the object. And sometimes it can seem, if the horse stays quite rideable throughout the flight response or the shy, then it can make it a much easier and more pleasant experience to correct the horse and return the horse to its line and back to the speed it was at. And that really comes down to these good basics. So if we have, good dressage basics as well as good prime responses, and what I mean by horse's ability to go, stop, and turn under challenging, circumstances. They're their primary responses. It doesn't have to be that the horse maintains its outline or it's particularly smooth, but just basically that the horse, in a spooky situation, still listens to your very, very most, basic prime responses, being that, if we, sit tall and squeeze the reins, that the horse stops when we ask to. And if the horse is a bit spooky with something in front and we close our leg, he walks on. And the same way, if if we need to turn towards it, we can turn towards it, and so on. So those responses really underpin, the basic controlling of the horse's flight response. But good basic dressage, in terms of the horse understanding its, starting to understand its, or certainly as a 4-year-old should be starting to understand its, independent flexion, from the rest of its body, and being able to bend and maintain the line through the transitions. If we can really focus on these things, when the horse shows its flight response, it makes the horse much more rideable when the horse has a shy, for example, than when it doesn't. If you've got a horse that has been, overexposed to something that's a bit too difficult, and the horse doesn't have this, basic understanding of flexion and bend, then, the horse can very much explode forward. And even with a very good, stop response, you can stop the horse, but it's not enough to get the horse to relax about, the spooky thing. So these problems and spooks, and I talk about this a lot as a 4-year-old because it's often what people have to deal with. As 4-year-olds, the education is quite simple, providing these other things don't get in our way. So 4-year-old is where we often start to take the horses out to new environments, and even in our own home, as the work gets slightly harder, or the horse starts to associate being ridden with slightly more work, they start to tension levels can rise about certain things if we're working through things, and that can produce a bit of a spooky area or something like that. And it's really important that when we solve these issues, that we solve them systematically and empathetically for the horse as well, because we have to understand that they really are just usually driven by fear. So we have to be empathetic to that, and just because we were able to ride in that spooky corner as a freshly green breaker doesn't mean that we should just be able to do it, canter head on through the corner just because now we're a 4-year-old. Circumstances changes, and a whole lot of things change in their body that really can make things seem different for them at different ages. So what I mean by systematically is one of the things that and you can see that in this photo. Actually, it's a photo of the arena at my property, and it's a particularly spooky arena, and I've learned a lot riding in it too. And one of the things I really often work on now is riding down the quarter lines instead of just riding the outside track. So there's one particular, and I think most arenas have a bit of a spooky corner, but this spooky corner is very difficult. And if you it actually has a random pump that goes on and off, as well as this white electrical box that all the horses seem to see. It appears after a tree. If you really focus on being able to ride your line and be able to produce, be able to ride good downward transitions and upward transitions on your line, then you'll be able to achieve relaxation past it. However, you have to be empathetic to how scary the object is for the horse, especially if it's something random like a pump, and systematic in terms of riding the quarter line, for example, or riding whatever distance away from the object you can do where you can still maintain these basics. Often it's a case where you might be, you might get past the object, great once or twice, or maybe not great, but on the outside great, but you can feel in the reins a certain tension building, and you really have to. That to me is an example where you're going beyond your horse's threshold to be able, or beyond the level that your aids and responses can handle in terms of how scary the object is. So riding a line or a circle at a distance where you can still, just maintain this, and repeating transitions on the line until you can do it accurately and get some relaxation is a great way to systematically work through an issue. And you might not go closer until maybe the next day, or you could do it in that session if the horse really starts to, relax. But the key is always maintaining this rideability, throughout the process, and not over facing your horse. So that's what I mean by, good basics and their limitations, which is point 3, is a horse with really good basics still has its limitations on what it can handle. And we need to be very mindful of that. And it's very easy to have a horse that's very well trained, but then to have accidentally overfaced it and have, in a way, opened up a can of worms. Some horses can can really flip a switch when, they get an idea in their head about what's scary, and we just keep pushing at it. And suddenly we've got this tension about a certain area that we can't control. But after a while, that tension starts to just creep into our everyday riding. And that becomes a real issue, and something that I certainly, with a lot of my clients that come to me for help, is that's a lot of what I'm seeing and having to deal with, is horses that have, basically good training, but have been taken slightly above their threshold on what they can handle, or what the rider can make the horse do, and that has produced this tension elsewhere in the training as well. And suddenly that spooky corner is now the other corner as well, and a little leaf that used to be fine is now terrifying for the horse. So it does creep in, and we have to be really careful about maintaining good basics and understanding which areas we can ride in, and what the goals are. Don't get too fixated on having to work and get the horse through that corner. It's really important to just keep riding the lines, and of course working towards the goal of being able to get through the corner, but riding the line that allows us to keep the best control, and above everything, the relaxation. So I say that about, and point 4 is the rhythm, the straightness, and the relaxation. That's really the ultimate goal for the 4-year-old, is being able to achieve that. And when we have really good control of the rhythm and the line, and the relaxation, or I should say the relaxation will come from that, the transitions on those lines, and then we'll get this feeling with a 4-year-old that they start to stretch and relax, and that's part of that goal as a 4-year-old, is to be able to get the horse to warm up. And maybe they have a little look around still as a 4-year-old, that's fine, even in their own environment. But after a solid 10-15 minutes, certainly not too much longer, although if something happens it may take longer, but generally after 10 to 15 minutes that the horse is starting to chew the reins forwards and starting to snort and getting relaxed to work a little bit more up again. So this takes us on to 5 to 6-year-olds, and I've grouped them together so that, and have made it actually very short so that it doesn't take too long. But basically, at this age we've worked through, in my opinion, if everything's gone well, everything difficult should have, all the really difficult parts, in my opinion, have been done. At this age, they're certainly a lot more confident and reliable, and depending on the horse, hopefully a bit more mature. So a good education really can bring about maturity in the horse much earlier. And I see that a lot with certain horses that are young but seem very mature, just because they really have a great understanding of their training, and therefore have the ability to just stand and be very relaxed in a new environment. So in terms of the 5 and 6-year-olds, we've got an emphasis on improved basics again. So it's still essentially the same dressage basics as a 4-year-old, different lines and, also basics through movements, but the same focus on the basics in terms of being able to get the horse straighter, more even between your legs and reins through the transitions. So some exercises that I really like to ride on my horses are just riding down the quarter line, or 2 meters off the wall is a new one. And just being able to ride these lines, particularly 2 meters off the wall, where you've still got some semi-support from the wall visually, but you're not supported on the outside by the wall for the horse. So you really start to get a good idea as to how the horse is leaning on you. And particularly if you have someone at the end of the arena watching you, you really get a good idea as to whether the horse actually stays between your legs in the downward transitions and between your reins. So a lot of these, issues in terms of in the transitions I see comes from the horse being crooked, either from upward transitions or being crooked from the legs. So when the rider squeezes the legs, the horse has a naturally crooked reaction in its upward transitions or forward pushing phase. And I see the same thing often with the bit and our downward transitions. So horses that feel the bit and naturally want to pull, which is completely normal, naturally want to pull more one side than the other, which then makes the horse's hindquarters swing out or in. So these things as 4-year-olds should be hopefully mostly ironed out, so that then we have the ability to move the horse's hindquarters around or shoulders around where we want them to be as a 5 and 6-year-old, and focus on the straightness throughout that. There's so much you can do just even on a 20-meter circle on basic transitions between canter and trot, back to canter, back to trot, and really get it to the point where you can sit on the circle, keeping the hands forward and just changing between canter trot. And that improves the horse's suppleness dramatically, as well as the obedience and the sharpness to the aids. So exercises like that, although they sound somewhat, simple, are actually, can be made as complicated or as complex as you want them to be, depending on really how strict you are with, exactly how you want them to be. And that's really the thing with the basics, is they can be as complicated, or not, I shouldn't say complicated, but as precise as you make them. And it's almost endless as to how precise you can make it. Certainly repetition after repetition it can be. I've added in here too that these horses, especially as 5 and 6 year olds, but even as 4-year-olds, can give you little glimpses of the future occasionally in their training, or when they're, really in a bit of peak form or something like that. And although it's great, and what I mean by that is they can give you this, fabulous feeling in the trot or something like that when you bring the horse back and they really start to respond as if they've, already learnt the half halt. And they come back and they start to, develop a bit of cadence. And this I've seen too, where riders, and it's easier to do, certainly for myself as well, is where you can get a little bit, addicted to that feeling and start chasing it. And really, as much as you can take it when you get it, and that's fantastic, it's really always going on and on. And we always hear this about, the basics, and repeating these lines, transitions, until the horse is so good at it that actually this feeling that we're looking for, that we had, those months ago and haven't felt since, it starts to come back, but more reliably and on a button almost. And that's really what good basics, circles, transitions on circles, quarter lines, between, in the movements, all of those things, that's what they really give you the ability to do, is to bring that feeling more when you want it. Rather than getting that feeling and then trying to ride the trot or the canter, or particularly the trot, more and more forward, trying to search for that feeling, and in the process creating a strong, stiff connection. So the last point, which is about at this age as a 5 and 6 year old, certainly as a 6 year old, but definitely you can do it as a 5 year old as well, is just advanced in hand training. And this is something that's becoming more common amongst trainers to be able to do as well. And it's a great skill to have, is to be able to work on the passage and piaffe, movements or abilities right from this age. And it's not that you have the horse piaffing and passaging at this age, but you certainly want to be working on being able to train, the basic idea and the concepts in terms of the horse's understanding of the concept of how to sit a little bit, and how to do small little short steps. And this can be done in hand in a much less stressful way than if you were to do it under saddle as a 5 year old. In hand, you can be much more precise at how you lift the horse's legs, and it really becomes a bit of fun for the horse. They certainly enjoy doing it. But we really focus on being able to, lift the horse's front legs and teach them how to open the shoulder in a way that they would have otherwise maybe never explored on their own, with us on their back. And the same with the hind legs, is teaching them to do shorter, little smaller steps with the hind legs, and working on being able to touch the legs with a bamboo stick or a whip or whatever you might use, and being able to touch and lift each limb and play around with those ideas certainly allows the horse to learn these complex, what becomes later the most complex thing to do, when at the time that you need it actually becomes quite simple, because the horse has already learned it. So that's really what this presentation, I tried to make it more about, is to show really what can be done, what hopefully should be done from the age of being a yearling to up to, just before they're 4 years old, is a huge portion of their life. And there's a lot to fit in terms of variability. There's never a stage where the horse learns more in terms of all the little things that they have to learn. But it really is a lot for them to take in. And from 4 years onwards, actually becomes a lot of the same. It's almost like if you do it in the right way, the horse almost doesn't even realize it's learning new things, because one thing seamlessly leads on to the next. There's certainly a lot less change in their life. So these first couple of years of their life is really, really important to get right, because it sets them up for a great future afterwards. And this is a bit the same with the advanced in hand training. It's a bit the same as setting them up so that they understand the most complex of movements, and at the time that you need them, you're not scratching your head going, why didn't I teach this earlier? You've already got it there and it's ready to be tapped into. So that's it for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I couldn't make it any more with the time that I had. I couldn't make it any shorter than that. But certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and any specific questions about your particular horse, feel free to email our office and go on our Facebook and ask through there. So thank you.